Hello. Thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation. So glad that you're tuning in. My name is Michael Ware. I'm the author of a book called Reclaiming Hope, the founder of Public Square Strategies, and happy to host this conversation about faith, COVID-19, and the opportunities that we've had to both grieve and to hope. I would like to first thank our partners for this event, the Ad Council, COVID Collaborative, Values Partnerships, Redeeming Babel, and ChristiansandtheVaccine.com. And we'll talk a bit more about that later in this conversation. And I would also like to thank my guests, my conversation partner for this event, Kate Bowler. Kate Bowler is Kate Bowler, PhD, is an associate professor of the history of Christianity in North America at Duke Divinity School. She is the author of Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel, which traces the history of the moment based on divine promises of health, wealth, and happiness. Then, after being unexpectedly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at age 35, Kate penned the New York Times bestselling memoir, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. Dr. Bowler subsequently staged a national conversation on speaking frankly about suffering through her popular podcast, Everything Happens. I will note Kate has also recently announced she has a new book called There's No Cure for Being Human that hopefully Kate will share with us a bit more about that book soon. Kate, I'm so glad you're with us. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Michael, I think last time I actually saw you, we were in Miami and our lives were really fun. There was a moment where people were, and it was great. So
fewer cicadas. There was considerably fewer cicadas. There was water. It was beautiful, but it's beautiful to be with you, Kate, Miami or not. Kate, I never sort of, I think, expressed this to you, but I think of you as in the mold of something that used to be a bit more common. I think has been less common, but I think people are wrong to think sort of the public figure was able to convey and help the general public understand sort of a mere Christianity, just what it basically means to be Christian in a way that's attractive and in a way that is considerate, in a way that helps them understand. I think you're that for me. And so
that's very nice. I have only the gifts of sarcasm and compliments, and you may have both in this conversation. These are, if there are true spiritual gifts, I'm hoping those are two of them.
Perfect. We'll try and touch on both of those. We have a lot to discuss, and this pandemic has provoked, I think, a difficult season for differently situated people in different ways.
Yes. Yeah.
And I find myself sort of like vacillating back and forth between a view that COVID has provoked a strange kind of solidarity, and one that COVID-19 has divisions that existed long before COVID-19, our inequities, our isolation. I've come to think that both are true in their own way, but I'm wondering, kind of as a Christian and as a historian, how have you thought about this pandemic, and what lessons do you think we should take with us as a people?
Yeah, well, it's so hard too when there's sort of these national, now international moments sometimes where we feel we are suddenly inextricably bound, and like and then things happen to us that are just beyond all the decisions we make with our day-to-day lives. So there are moments that like our great-grandparents remember with the Great Depression or stock markets rising and falling, even all those who never got jobs back that they lost in 2008. I mean, there are moments of intense national, the word I love so much is precarity.
Yes.
I love that word, that like there are things that happen that are like contingent, they're precarious, they're given, and then taken away. And we all had a moment at the exact same time when the life we imagined for ourselves was there and then pulled from our hands.
Right.
And it provoked, I think, a lot of very intense ethical, existential, political conversations about how much we need each other, what we owe each other, whose lives we really, really value. I remember that very first conversation everyone was having in March and April was whether or not who deserves shelter? Like, do we protect the lives of the elderly? And all of a sudden we were trying to run math that we maybe hadn't run in a long time about what our commitments demand from us. And I think one of the things that was not just a metaphor anymore for us is that there's no such thing as individualism. Like there's no, in a pandemic, there's no winner take all. There's just, contagion meant that we were all wrapped up in each other. And in one way that is like so unbelievably like Christian is for us to figure out that we owe each other so much more than maybe we imagine. And then this other way, it really brought out the worst in all of us when we were just like frustrated. Like there's toilet paper shortages and really horrifying debates about whose lives are more valuable than others. So it's been a very strange time to imagine our interconnectedness, I think.
Yeah. And I do think, it became very clear that for all of our talk of sort of self-creation and pursuing our dreams, that we are in a world in which we can still be acted upon in a way that is outside of our control. And then to see sort of, like you said, like the hand sanitizer shortages and all these sort of ways of sort of trying to reassert some kind of control over matters was really, really something to see. I think I want to keep like the social and the sort of historical in mind, but I also know that in your personal life, health crises are not foreign to you. Your book, Everything Happens, is in part a reflection on the kind of faith that you can rely on and the kind you can't when faced with serious trials. I'm curious whether there are aspects of that book, Everything Happens, that sort of you first wrote as personal observations, but that came to mind as applicable in new ways over the last 18 or so months.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Because I wrote Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved out of a moment of very intense, it was kind of like a very angry love letter where you kind of fall in love with a life you have, and then it's pulled away. And then everyone felt very comfortable explaining to me why I had lost the life I loved, where, I was 35. I have a very sudden cancer diagnosis with no family history. And I've got this little toddler, and the man I've been married to since, it felt like saying since high school, but basically, but since I was a beautiful child bride, Michael. But like the way that we try to pour reasons into suffering, and people wanted to find a reason why and they would never like say deserve to my face, but they're like picking, right? Where they're like, well, is there family history? You can hear it too in the pandemic. Like, well, was there pre-existing conditions? Like what people want is the invisible math that tells you that like, there's a reason you're suffering and therefore I'm safe. And it wasn't trying to be cruel, but there is a cruelty in the idea that suffering can't come to all of our doors. And that was maybe a lesson that it felt like everybody was experiencing at the same time this last year. And while the loneliness of cancer, it was hard kind of being the only person, this was everybody. That felt very familiar to me, that like surreal, like hyper reality where you're like, oh, a global earth plague? Huh. Oh, you see it traveling and eating up the globe, and millions die. That felt like it also makes you realize too that tragedy is kind of like it stays in a very strange place in your mind where you know what's happening to you, but you're always struggling to be a meaning-making creature, right? Like we want our lives to count and to be beautiful and true, but holy crap, like some of the people that we have loved and then absolutely lost in this last year, the terrible grief of people we never would have expected to die. Like it's hard to hold both those things in tension, having a meaningful life and at the same time being able to practice like surrendering why it happened to somebody and not to somebody else.
Right. That leads me to kind of my next question. So when we passed 100,000 deaths, a reporter for a national paper reached out and was writing a story on mourning, not particularly tied to faith, but it was just sort of this question that became common, which was like, how does a nation mourn, particularly when, when there are lockdowns and when a sort of social distancing. But I mean, this is kind of an aside. It was striking to me how that conversation in general turned pretty immediately to faith and religion, and then just personally, it was surprised. I thought, why am I the one getting this phone call?
What did you say, Michael?
Yeah, right. Well, maybe we'll get into that. Yeah, but part of it is that mourning is part of that meaning-making process.
Yeah.
And that mourning and the way that we mark death is an important part of being a community and recognizing the dignity of other people. And so if for political reasons or social reasons, technological reasons, we have lost, we forego or are kept from mourning appropriately. There is a deep loss there, not only at the personal level, but I think we miss something as a people. And so, well, we also, in your work has kind of touched on this, which is that, we are, our culture does not like thinking about things like mortality or things lost.
No, I mean, this is the country that invented positive thinking. I mean, this is a country that really has to talk itself into disaster preparedness because it's like, oh, it'll probably be fine.
No, that's exactly right. So do we miss something when we miss mourning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and as a historian of American religion, I mean, one of the really unique things about American religion is it does have that very deep optimism bias. It really equates optimism. It's always going to get better. Don't worry, but better, faster, stronger. Best life now. And like it equates that with resilience. Like that's what shows that we're tough. That's what shows that the problem is, of course, is that when you have the kind of mass suffering, mass grief, what we have if we skip it and we just try to go to the easiest way to tell this story is to go, better than before. We're going to get better than before, rebuild. Like the pivot to the rebuild, it prevents that moment of like integration where first it allows us to say, are these really the choices that reflect our deepest hopes and values for who we want to become? Like, is there anything we need to learn here? Because if you move into like let's move on, no regrets, or like the no regrets philosophy, it does prevent that minute where regrets really, like, your past can transform your future. That was a big moment for me when I had my before and after. When I thought I was going to die that year, I was like, oh, maybe I wouldn't have just been like a hyper ambitious, like work monster, like if I thought my life would end at 35, maybe. And it's hard, but it's good. to say, like, if I get a chance, this beautiful thing is going to be mine, And then the other piece that we lose when we don't integrate, people want to say it's negativity, but I think it's honestly, I think it's reality. I think it's just reality. It's just, my simplest prayer is always like, God, let me see the world as it is. Like, God, like, let me see it. Let me see the beauty and the pain. And if we can see both, then we get a minute to see the suffering that God is asking us to help meet, and then the beauty of what's already here. And like, if we don't do that, we become, I think it looks a little more like denial. And I think it already rewards the people who are going to be winners anyway. There are all kinds of people who are left behind in this pandemic and will be in the next coming years. Like immunocompromised people like me we're the little delicate creatures who are like, you wear masks for me and like, thank you, and like it's hard to remember when people want to just move on.
Sure.
That like, there are people we need to carry with us, like living and dead, and I'm really hopeful that we're going to have a bit of a lightly chastised American individualism. And I don't just say that because I'm Canadian, but like, I want us to keep remembering that the beauty that we found when we realized how much we needed each other.
Right. And to carry that forward, that it is so easy to try and forget the reality of precarity and to move on from the sense that we need other people, but that can actually be something that that strengthens us as a people if we're willing to like contend with it. I do think there is, and like people won't say this explicitly, but there is. I think American Christians feel like God is up to the task of like their personal struggles, like, help me be nicer to my colleagues at work, like help me, but when something societal hits, there is, again, it wouldn't be explicitly stated, but there is a concern, like maybe like God isn't up to this, like maybe like Jesus's teachings apply sort of in like personal life and in just like, like give to charity when you can and like be nice. But like when things really hit the fan, then we're kind of on our own. But reflect on that a bit.
And it's been one of the great sort of endless splits inside of Christianity, especially over and over again, is we're like, oh, wait, are we individualists or are we collectivists? Do we like groups or does God transform groups or does God transform people? And I mean, obviously God transforms both, but like we do see things differently based on which vantage point we take, right? That's what we've learned, I hope in the last few years about like the beauty of diversity and plurality in our own communities is like, we do learn something really important about God when we decide that like God is in the business of being exactly where we are in our midst, doing something a little sneaky, and in this version, I hope that God will help transform our accidental pride in our abilities. Sometimes when we're the first to get up and get going, like God bless hustlers. God bless the people who can like who get up and like, and open their business and do all the things that like provide for others. The strong. God bless the strong, but like God bless the weak. Like the places where we go that says like, gosh, this is gonna take a zillion of us pitching in to transform. For instance, like, do you remember those first moments after the lockdown in March? I remember driving around and seeing all the people that were just had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think I'd ever seen that clearly, that like everybody else had somewhere to go.
Right.
Except it was like a horrible Kirk Cameron Left Behind version of like, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like this, God, you are like giving us eyes to see that like some are sheltered and some are not. And like in a moment like this, that might mean life or death. Yeah. And like we need to keep that in front of our eyes, like to remember. And that is a collective solution.
Yeah.
Like that's nothing that individualism can solve, regardless of how many, you know, very benevolent billionaires the world apparently creates. Like that's just us.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, I think, a new attentiveness to the ways in which, you know, prison populations are vulnerable. Yes. As you said, homeless populations are vulnerable in a way that was made apparent because, I mean, we were all going through this together, ostensibly, and in a sense, like really. And then because we were all going through it together, our eyes were opened in a different way to the ways in which we were not going through this. Together.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I think it showed us, and thankfully, those are all the groups that Jesus names.
Right.
And like, originally I thought like, oh, the widow, the poor, the orphaned, like that's just because God wants us as individuals to be like super nice to those people.
That's
like
right.
How amazing for me to learn to be a better person. And like, It took me forever to realize like, no, it's because God has a special ability to like show us God's own character like through weakness. And like so when we go there, that's where God is. So like this is also a chance for us to remember that we're going to stay weak for a long time. And it is okay that it will take a bit to understand how this transformed our relationships, how this challenged or reinforced our faith, like what beautiful things it brought together, and what things still need repair. Like it is okay. It's not a test, but it is okay that it like reveals to us, you know, places where God can be.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for that, Kate. You know, we're now sort of in a new stage of this pandemic. Vaccines have been available for 6 months. Half of American adults, it was announced this week, have been vaccinated. Great. Sort of the promise of spring was followed by the promise of reopening. Do you view the availability of the vaccine as good news? And as someone who is immunocompromised and who has faced health precarity in a number of ways, like how have you thought about the vaccine and that decision individually in the community you're in, and then as a Christian, do you think Christians should be thinking about this particular moment and season we're in a particular way?
Yeah. And I will say this very frankly, as someone who has had good medicine and bad medicine in my life. I have been in the thick of like really rough medical situations. And I have been grateful for the way that medicine and community and the love of God like continues to save my life. And so when I see the burden of first responders and all the people rushing to get this out and to be the first one to be a guinea pig for me, I feel tremendously fortunate that we have had such a global effort to get out something that saves the lives of people like me. I mean, I understand that people, some especially healthy people, might feel like they just want to go it alone. But as someone who is the weaker one, I would love it if I would love it if everybody could suspend, if not for them, do it for people like me. I think it is a tremendous act of love of neighbor, of an intense like mutuality, to say that like we are given, you know, the work of science sometimes also just feels a lot like natural revelation. Like when, thank God, we have the beauty of the things that can be made and found in this earth. So like, thank you for a sunset. Thank you for scientists who stayed to ran bazillion hour shifts to get this to us. So I know that no medicine is perfect. I am absolutely very happy to announce that I am not a blind believer in all medicine. All medicine is good. But in this case, I am so incredibly grateful for and I'll just say this quite frankly, like I'm from Canada. Canada has a severe shortage of vaccines. Americans are incredibly fortunate right now to be in a global glut of good medicine. So like I need people to acknowledge how unbelievably fortunate they are to be given the gift of choice. So you can not only just pick a vaccine or not, you can pick which one you want, you beautiful creatures. So like, get it.
No, there's, I mean, just as you're talking, there's this passage in Galatians that has just meant a great deal to me over the years, where Paul is writing to basically a divided people that have been torn apart for a whole number of reasons. And, when we think like today about like our advice for like polarized communities, it's usually like some kind of like power sharing agreement, like, like you on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and like let's just be peaceful. And Paul advises them. He says, like what is directly contradictory to division, which is not tolerance, but he tells them that they ought to bear one another's burdens. And in this way, people will know and see the love of Christ.
In this case, truly, it feels like love. It does. Like it really does feel like love when we decide that it is best for all of us to achieve herd immunity because people have decided to get that. That would be a tremendous act of national care.
Yeah. Well, okay, I just have one more question for you, and that is, you have a new book coming out.
Oh, I do, yeah. It's very sad. No, some of it's funny, I promise.
I'm very excited about it. It's very exciting. The book is There's No Cure for Being Human.
Yeah.
Tell us about it. And was it, I think I mean this like rhetorically, was it influenced in any way by the last couple of years?
Isn't that so? Well, yeah, a couple of years, yeah.
Well, I think it was, after the kind of initial crisis of a cancer diagnosis, I realized that I knew how to survive, but I didn't know how to live. Like as 1 year became 2 years, became 3, and I was always kind of dangling over the edge with my health, that I realized like, I kept repeating every time I wanted to feel less bananas, I'd be like, oh yeah, life is a chronic condition. Like this is just gonna, and I realized like if precarity was gonna be the place that I'd have to live, I learned to need to make a home there. And so I, as a historian of self-help, I went through different kind of cultural scripts about how people give you advice about how to live, like you only live once, or be present, or, best life now. Yeah. And I took on the kind of like, what is the gift of that advice and what is the hilarious shortcomings, and how do we learn to live now that we are changed? So it turns out then there was an earthquake and here we are.
Yeah, no, it's, well, so I'm thinking of, a funny sort of comment is, I think, I'm a big Dallas Willard guy, and in his book, Divine Conspiracy, he runs through some of these slogans, I'm not perfect, just forgiven, but then he also comments on the Oscar Mayer Wiener song, and he kind of, in a very sort of endearing way, sort of, suggest what a crazy, insane thing it is that for like a generation there were kids auditioning to say that if they could be anything, they'd be an Oscar Mayer Wiener, and what that entails. So it just on the sloganeering part of Christianity and of culture generally. I'm excited for your insights there. And then another thing that Willard taught me was that the Lord sets the table for David in the presence of his enemies. I feel like we take that psalm and think it's like for personal retreats or like moments of solitude. But like David's in a precarious situation, and it's in that moment that the Lord, that the Lord is with him. And so I'm really excited for your book. I'm grateful for you, Kate. You're just,
Thanks,
thank you for the work you do. Thank you for who you are. And so appreciate your being a part of this conversation. Do you have any sort of closing thoughts? How could people, obviously folks can read your books. Is there any other way that folks can follow your work?
I mean, so I'm at Kate C. Bowler on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and we post a lot of just kind of blessings and spiritual resources for people who are trying to live in that uncertain place. So I would love, I'm grateful for what you're doing, Michael. I think trying to foster a gentler place is the right move for our time. So yeah, come find me there, and we'll bless the crap out of you. So.
Kate, thank you so much. Just a few closing thoughts, which is for the audience. First of all, again, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation was helpful to you. I do want to let you know that you can go to getvaccineanswers.org to learn more about the vaccines. You can go to christiansandthevaccine.com. Again, that's christiansandthevaccine.com to access resources that might be helpful for you, that they might be helpful for people you know, common questions about the vaccine, theological resources for navigating the decision yourself or in community. And so those are two resources I'd really love for you to consider. And then I just say, there is going to be, as Kate sort of discussed, there is going to be a narrative, particularly as we move to the summer and particularly as businesses reopen and there's a drive to sort of like boost growth back, and all of that's, to an extent, that's wonderful. We want to see businesses thriving and the economy rebounding and all of this. Don't lose perspective on the fact that you need to be cared for, and that the people in your life need to be cared for, and people on the margins need to be cared for. As Kate said, for whom the immediate bounce back is not to be taken for granted. That extends to a whole number of ways of thinking. For me, it extends to the vaccine itself and the decision to get a vaccine, not just for your own good, but for the community. And obviously that is everyone's personal decision. This conversation and the resources that we've provided are about helping you think through that for yourself. And so again, getvaccineanswers.org, christiansandthevaccine.com. Again, thank you for being a part of this conversation. On behalf of our sponsors, Ad Council, COVID Collaborative, Values Partnerships, Redeeming Babel, I'm Michael Weir. I want to thank you. Thanks for being with us.